me and I've given him what I've gotten new the last day or two, he may say to me, don't bother talking to Bob Jones or Joe Smith. I've already done that. I'll tell him people I've talked to and what they've said. So that's how I work when I do cases of that nature. So as far as jealousy, I mean, once in a while you're always going to get a jealousy angle, no matter what profession you're in. I've been very fortunate and blessed that I've had some good success on many cases and gotten notoriety. And you do get a little bit of that. But by and large, I have a great relationship with any of the police departments because they know I'm not out to hurt them. I'm out to give them whatever evidence I uncover.
Yeah, but if you find the answer before they do, doesn't that make them look bad?
Well, that goes on sometimes, okay? I did a Nancy Grace show one night, and it was there was a murder in this little small department in this community. And the local police department, a very small local police department, one of the chiefs was on there, and he was talking about it. And I had read up that day, again, I did my homework, I had read up that day that the neighboring town, a major city, had offered their services on this murder case because they did them on a daily basis. And they said to this chief of this like a 12-member police department, hey, call us, we'll get our best people in, we'll help. The chief did not do that, okay? And I really, right on the TV show, I said, Nancy, I'm having a little trouble with why now over the last 2 weeks he have not brought in these top forensic and these top people that do these murder cases every day. You're supposed to throw up your hands and say, hey, this is out of our league. We need help here. Joe, come and help us. Bring your people in. And Nancy Grace really hammered him and said, why aren't you doing this? And he really couldn't answer. He just, well, we're working on it. So there is sometimes a prideful thing, like we can do this ourselves. So it's not just against the PI, it's against even, why do we got to bring the FBI in? Why do we got to bring that other town in? I'm the chief here. We should be able to solve this, which is a stupid way to handle any kind of a case.
I got about 60 seconds before the break. I'd like to know the answer to this question. I saw in one of your PR releases, they referred to you as a celebrity private detective. What does that mean?
Well, because I've worked some of the high-profile cases across the country, Jason Williams, the basketball player, I've done work with Michael Bolton. I've done some work for him.
Yeah, I read that Bolton chapter. That was pretty funny.
That is, especially
the way
the writer did that. And I guess they just pinned that label on me. But, 99% of my work is the local Connecticut, New York work, and those are high-profile things to my clients. That's their high-profile cases.
We're going to pick this up here. Again, the book is Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. Let's talk about that Jason Williams story and a couple of the other high-profile cases that Vito Colucci has worked on, and we'll pick at some of the things that you thought you knew in the news next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Talking with Vito Colucci, who is a private investigator, former police officer who has been inside many high-profile cases, and he writes about that in Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. And we'll pick up some of those files. We'll open them up again in just a moment. The people that Vito Colucci has investigated think you understood the whole story. You might not think that way. Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. So we're talking with Vito Colucci, Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. Before we get there real quickly on some of these other cases, let me go back a little bit to what you were talking about before, investigating the Michael Skakel case. When you're brought in by the defense, do you have any fiduciary responsibility to give to the prosecution evidence that you find that incriminates the person that you've been hired to clear?
No, I don't. What happens on these cases, Ian, and a lot of times people, they get the wrong impression. They see me work a case when I'm working for the defense, and they say, oh, you're trying to get him off. I'm not trying to get him off, because when I go out and investigate a case, I take the good and the bad that people give me. If I'm interviewing you and you're giving me a bunch of stuff that's hurting my client, I still give that to whoever hires me. Okay?
But you don't give that to the police.
Oh, no, of course not. No, I give it to, because, the way we work is I'm hired by the attorney, I'm hired by the family, whatever it may be.
Right. But you're not an officer of the court, per se.
No, definitely not.
But if you investigated, and you found, let's say you were hired by the family to clear a particular person for a rape and a murder. You find in the course of your investigation, maybe initially some stuff that said that he didn't do it. And then you find, oops, he did do it. And you find somebody who flat out gives you information or evidence that they did not give to the police. Now, as a former police officer and now as a private investigator hired by a family, what do you do with that?
All right, what I would do, and this is just me, I would probably go to the people that hired me, the attorney or whatever, discuss what this evidence was, and I'd probably bow out, to be very honest with you. If I really felt, I'd bow out for a couple reasons. Number one, I don't have to defend the person like a defense attorney has to do. Okay? I don't have to do that. So in my conscience, I may bow out, tell them that, just give them all the information I've gotten up to that point and just go on my merry way, so to speak. So I have that right that I can do that. On the other hand, if I still feel that there's something I can bring to the table maybe as far as additional interviews, again, good or bad, I may continue. But see, I'm not locked in that I have to stay, especially if I get overwhelming evidence and I go, oh, my God, look at this. I don't want to be involved in this. I remember when the what's his name, out in, killed his wife there out in California. I can't even think of his name.
Okay, let's
Scott
see.
Peterson.
Scott Peterson. I was going to say O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, no, Scott, I know, right?
Yeah. The people in California that
I
killed
remember
his
Scott Peterson case first broke. One of my daughters, I have 4 daughters, they're all grown up, and one of them said to me, and she was acting a little funny, and I said, what's the matter? And she says, you're not going to get involved in that case, are you? I said, no way. I said, first of all, nobody's asked me, and no way. I'm not going to get involved in that. Because I go, why? She goes, well, I just believe he's guilty. And I said, well, so do I said. So, there are cases. See, a defense attorney gets hired.
Yeah, but I'm going to pick at this a little bit, Vito,
go ahead.
Because I think, when you say you're going to bow out of a case, tell me the difference between bowing out and copping out. And I don't mean that to be harsh on you, but I just mean if you know that somebody did something, say, and I'm a private citizen,
right?
Aren't I bound by law to turn over incriminating evidence to the authorities? If I come across something, can't I be charged for withholding evidence or for obstructing an investigation if I don't turn over evidence to the police or to prosecutors? Why is it different for you?
Well, it's not. I wouldn't say copping out. I don't think that's the right terminology. What it means is, if I'm out there pounding the pavement as a doing the old shoe leather type of investigation out there, and I obtain evidence that really looks like Ian committed this crime. Okay,
right.
and
I probably did. So I'm copping to it right now. You broke me.
Right. Right. And I mean, I have to go to my client, and he goes, "What did you come up with, Vito? Doesn't look good, Attorney Smith. Look at this stuff here. It's everybody's pointing the finger. You're going to get clobbered. He did the crime, the whole bit." Now, I don't have to – see, that's not my responsibility that I have to go to the police and say, Detective so-and-so, look what I uncovered, because it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't work that way. So it has nothing to do –
Well, what's the difference between you and a private citizen? I mean, if I came across that information and I found, here's the shoebox with the evidence in it, I don't think I'm going to tell anybody about it, or maybe I'll just give it to the defense attorneys and let them bury it for me.
Well, the whole thing is if I'm not doing anything illegal. See, that's not doing anything illegal. If I try to do what this Pelicano did out in California, who was a disgrace to the whole industry, if I did stuff what he's doing, that's a different story. And the man went to jail already, probably deserves to go again. But no, if I get something that I know for sure points the finger at my guy, I don't do a Pelicano and try to get rid of it or try to turn it around. I give it to my people as a Christian man, and if I want to bow out, and I don't think it's copping out, if I want to bow out and say, hey, save the rest of the money, I don't want to continue my part of the investigation.
I understand that, and I know I'm being hard on you.
No, that's okay. No, that's quite all right.
Let me throw this at you again. Let's say you bow out. You hand over to the defense attorney what you were hired to find. It just happens to be evidence against his client and not for your client's innocence.
Right.
You bow out. The defense attorney decides, you know what? I'm just not going to raise these issues in court. Turns out the jury acquits the man and he gets off and he's free and clear. And you know that there was evidence out there. You know that the defense attorneys had it. You know that the prosecutors did it. And you know that if the jury knew what you knew, he would be convicted and he would be serving his rightful, time behind bars. How do you reconcile that? How do you feel good about you going to bed at night knowing what you know?
Well, you have to remember something. That happens both ways a lot of times. A lot of times, is whether it's defense side or prosecution side, a lot of things the judge decides is not going to be admissible in a certain trial. Okay, I can hold my head up on something like that because that's not, again, my responsibility. See, in other words, you got to remember something. I cannot go running to the other side every time I conduct an interview that says, yeah, I saw that Joe drive down the street and he hit her at a high rate of speed and he continued going on. I write that up. I give it to the attorney. See, I'm obligated by the confidentiality to just give that stuff to whoever hires me.
Right.
I'm bound by that. So,
I get that, but I just mean you as a person. I just mean, I hear you, and I think you're perfectly, rightful in doing this. But I hear you deferring to the system and saying, well, this is our system and I can exist within the system. I would just tell you that would drive me mad. If I knew that somebody was, especially if I knew an innocent person was going behind bars, right. And this is a case that is, kind of theoretical for us. It was a real life case we discovered about a month ago where there were people that had evidence that a man was innocently being held behind bars for 17 years.
Right.
And they couldn't say anything until their client finally died, and then they could bring forth the evidence that they had all along. 17 years a guy sat behind bars because the system said these attorneys didn't have to bring forward that information that cleared an innocent man. Mm. And I think by that point, I would be in a straitjacket. I would be in a rubber room before that ever got there.
You are right. And see, we're bound to certain rules and regulations. When you get involved in this type of business and you work murder cases and rape cases and things like that, you see, you have to follow the letter of the law. Because you also have a situation here, too, where if I went against that, and said, okay, I'm going to go right to the police with this other stuff because I can't live with myself, you would be taking away from what you are as a private detective. In other words, you would never get hired again, first of all. And I'm not saying that you go and lie. What I'm saying is you're supposed to work on a team. If you want to get off that team, like people change attorneys.
Right.
I've seen cases where every time I'm talking to the client, they got a different attorney. So there's many times that happens. PIs change cases, whatever.
Sure.
That's how you do it. But, if you started doing it well, hey, Mr. Prosecutor, look what I've come up with. I really think my guy's guilty and I'm getting off the case. You might as well go back and, do some other kind of work for a living, You
know what? And I think that's my problem is I think if I came across evidence that said somebody were guilty and I didn't bring it forward and an innocent person went to jail, I think I might get another job. And I might just go ahead and throw myself on the grenade on that and just say, look, I know I'm giving up my career, but I can't in good conscience prosper from this secret while somebody else it has to pay the time for my prosperity.
Right.
I mean, that's just a trade-off.
What happens though with a lot
deal with the devil. I mean, that's pretty dark for me.
Well, what I've seen happen with a lot of the good defense attorneys, then once they know that happens, they sit their client down and they go, hey, let me just get you the best deal I can, but we're not going to win, and you're going to get clobbered if we go to trial. Right. So, a lot of times it works out that way, so maybe somebody will get 5 to 7 years instead of 15 to 20. Is it right? I don't know. But see, even with our system in this country, it's still the best in the world, believe me, compared to other places. Is it perfect? No, definitely not.
Well, and I know I'm picking at an imperfection. But
no, that's quite all right. That's an interesting point. That's very interesting.
And 17 years, a guy who sat behind bars, who's been saying he's innocent the whole time, who gets out because now finally somebody who, quote unquote, had an obligation to not tell the truth, finally told the truth. Right. And I just think that's not what the system, I believe, was set up for.
No,
so that innocent people can go behind. And while somebody else, he had 17 years of filing IRS returns and had successful years as an attorney, and I think that's a deal with the devil.
Yeah,
I mean, that's absolutely. I just can't. But anyway, but let's talk about some of these other cases, like the Jason Williams case. Set the table for this on Jason Williams.
Okay, Jason Williams, former All-Star basketball player with the New Jersey Nets, goes and watches the Harlem Globetrotters one night at a neighboring college. A couple of his friends he used to play with in the NBA were now playing for a short time with the Globetrotters. So he goes with what I can call a bunch of hanger-ons, okay? And what I mean by that, what Jason Williams, what I learned about Jason is once he met you, you were a friend, okay? And that's bad and good, okay? Once he met you, you were brought into this his association. You were brought into this mansion of mansions that he lived in.
He was a very gregarious guy who shared his prosperity.
Right. And because of that, there was a lot of people that clung to that. Here's a man that just signed. He had just signed at that point an $85 million contract, plus all the millions of contracts he had before that. And you know, as it works with a rock star or whatever, you have sometimes the wrong type of people that are around you. So they go to this basketball game. They have a chauffeur hired that night. They go back over to Jason's estate. And as he's showing everybody the estate and his vintage cars in the garage, I mean, this all took place in a matter of minutes, okay? I mean, they were only in the house for a few minutes. He picks up a shotgun that he had in the display case. He gets it. It's open. He swings it closed. The gun goes off. The chauffeur lays dead. Okay, that part is all documented. We, as part of the defense team, we won in court, showing he was acquitted of the bigger charges, showing that it was an accident. That part. What he was found guilty on was the after things of tampering with evidence.
Well, talk about what he did. What did he do after? So he shoots the chauffeur.
Okay,
and then
now you got a panic situation because you have the Globetrotters came back to Jason's house, to several of them, as well as Jason's friends. So you got a lot of people in this one big, gigantic master bedroom where he's giving them a tour of the house. So, you know, what happens, like I said, the gun goes off. Gus Christofi lies dead on the floor. And then, like I said, the bad part happens. And this is, you know, and Jason was found guilty of that. I'm not going to say here. And Jason was found guilty as well as the other people. They were not tried, but they all admitted their roles. Because what happened here, you had a bunch of people that saw their world, their life with Jason crumbling. Sure. This is it. They were going to exit Jason's stage. Okay? No more. No more being around Jason. This is the end of the high life is gone. So everybody in their own way kind of thought of, well, let's do this, let's do that, the whole thing.
So what did they do? So what did they actually do to cover up the case?
Well, what they did was they placed Gus Christofi's hands on the gun. Okay, they tried to somehow to put his hands on the gun. One person took Jason's clothes from him. Now, again, I'm not sitting here saying Jason was the innocent guy, okay? I mean, he got involved in this. You know what I tell people, and I wrote about it in the book, one thing I learned about this case, Ian, is that we would all hope in our mind, if we were ever in a situation like that, whether, God forbid, on a backcountry road we hit somebody, or you pick up your gun in the house and something happens, that we would all do the right thing, okay? If anybody would say, oh, yes, 1,000%, I would always do the right thing, we don't know that, unless you're in that situation as to what you would actually do. We would all hope, I would hope in my mind that I would always do the right thing. But I learned on this case that sometimes good people don't do the right thing.
Okay, so they faked a suicide. Let's just cut to the chase.
They faked the suicide.
They made the victim look like he had perpetrated the crime against himself,
right,
so that they could all stand around and say, "Oh my God, what a horrible thing." They all concocted a story. They decided to stick with it. What was the time differential that somehow the chauffeur had walked into the house, grabbed a shotgun, and killed himself?
Right. Now, the thing that bothered me, though, about the case, okay, and like I said, Jason was found guilty on those charges there, which were smaller charges in regards to little or no jail time, okay, was you had a whole bunch of people involved in this. The New Jersey State Police gave them all immunity. Everybody except Jason, okay? Everybody that hid clothes, everybody that did this, everybody that, in other words, everybody just point your finger at Jason. And, again, rightfully so, he was found guilty on his part of this whole thing.
But he pulled the trigger. For whatever reason, the other people didn't pull the trigger. So
Right. Oh, no, Jason pulled the trigger. Like I said, at court, after a long trial, it was found that it was an accident. He was acquitted on all those. They all paid the price. Jason paid the price, like I said, on the tampering and the physical evidence and things of that nature. And there's still one more charge outstanding that they're still waiting to go to court on, one that was a hung jury on it. It was when they voted, it was a percentage to acquit him, but they still have to go back and finish that one last charge. So it was a wild, crazy scene when that happened. Everybody, including Jason, was just doing their thing, so to speak, and was it the right logic? Of course not. But, the main thing is hopefully I brought to the table enough evidence on my part to show some people that lied, some guy that wanted a bribe from Jason of money to change his story. So,
that's what I want to get to. What did you then? Now, you're the defense attorneys are still making this claim that our client was a victim of this crazy chauffeur who grabbed a gun, and in his home, our client had to have this guy commit suicide right there. He did the best he could under these bizarre circumstances, and then you start investigating. So what do you find out right away as a private investigator that's different from what the official police accounts are?
Okay, now you got to remember something. The claim of the chauffeur killing himself, that did not last long at all, because by the time they arrest Jason and go after these other hanger-ons, the time I'm brought in, it's already established that Jason did shoot the gun, okay? So I'm brought in then to do a bunch of things, conduct backgrounds on all these people that were involved that night, that were there, get statements from them, do things of that nature, delve into it really a lot. Then we started gathering information, like I said, one former NBA player. I
want you to hang on to that, because
sure.
That's not enough for me. When you say delve into that a lot, I want to delve into that coming up. It sounds like you're hired to be a credibility hitman for these people that had been hanging on with, Jason Williams, popular guy, rich guy. What does a private investigator do? What's too far for an private investigator? Which brings me back to the Pelicano case, and I want to hear more from you on that on the way to next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. We're inside the private eyes of a private eye, Vito Colucci, talking about some of America's top high-profile cases, what he's done during the investigations. And then I want to get to the Pelicano case, which definitely had all of these dark elements to it, the seedy underside, if you will, of the private investigation business. He touched on it earlier. We'll pick at that next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, let's go back to where we left off with Vito Colucci, and just let me know if at any time you feel like you need to call a defense attorney, and I totally understand that. But I am curious about the investigation, because I think the Jason Williams case, high-profile basketball stars seem to have a huge future in front of him as a very affable TV commentator. He was sort of magic on television, sparkling smile, had everything going for him. And then he pulls a shotgun out of a case while he's giving a tour to some people that are in his entourage. He's showing the chauffeur as well. And the shotgun goes off, kills the chauffeur. Right. And whoever starts it, however it gets started, next thing you know, they're staging a suicide and implicating the chauffeur in his own death. Now, is this a case where you can't tell me what you really found out because you would be violating confidentiality? Is that why I get a sense a little bit of... No,
not at all. I have it right in the book, right. What was found out. Let me give you a couple examples of what a good private detective tries to do on a case like this. Okay, the prosecution, and even on TV, on Court TV at the time. They made a big deal about this $627 liquor bill that Jason and his people rang up. So, they went to the ball game, and before they got to the house, they stopped at a restaurant close to Jason's house. It was about 10 of them, I believe. And they ate dinner, and they rang up a $600-something liquor bill. Now, prosecution made a big point about that. Oh, my God, he was drunk. Everybody was drunk. Look at the size of that liquor bill, okay? What a private detective does is he goes to this establishment, talks to the owner, gets the bill, and dissects it, and you find out that a good part of it, at least half of it, was used for very expensive cigars that the group had that night, and they dipped that into after-dinner cordials before they smoked it. I'm not a drinker, and I don't even smoke cigars. But we found that out. So right away you bring to the table, okay, wait a minute. And not only that, let's not forget, he was never found that he was intoxicated. They made reference that he was drunk. Nothing showed that he was intoxicated, none of the prosecution stuff. They tried to use this. So what a defense people do, a private detective, is they go and they delve into this. And bingo, right away you see, hey, half of this is for cigars and after-dinner cordials. That blows that out of the water. Second thing is that everybody was given deals. So now what people were doing, there were so many different stories that they were saying. Some people at the restaurant were saying Jason treated the chauffeur bad. He would look over at him and swear at him or do something like that. But meanwhile, when you talk to the people there that really knew Jason, you would find out that if Jason kind of looked at the chauffeur, it was Jason's way. They knew that he'd look over at you and say, if they were all laughing, then he looked over at you and said, hey, Ian, what are you laughing about? Who told you could laugh? And then he'd say, I'm just kidding. And then everybody would laugh. See, some of the people who wanted to really build up the story to get their immunity would say, oh, man, he treated Ian really bad. Oh, you should have heard him at the restaurant talk to him. But I had to delve in to show, no, that wasn't true at all. So what you do as a PI, you don't taint somebody's reputation. You try to get to the facts, like I said, about the liquor bill. And we found, like I said, one of the NBA players, there was our evidence that discredited him totally because he wanted financial help to change his story. Okay? So we brought that to the table. So that threw him out of the water. So that's what you do. You don't do things illegally like Pelicano did. You try to delve into your case, and as a PI, you give it to the people that hire you.
All right, now I'll get to the Pelicano thing in just a second, but let's again talk about this.
Sure.
In that when it seems like then your job as a private investigator is how would you best describe your role at that point? It seems like that your job is to find out all the things that can be said negative about the person who is testifying against your client. And it just seems like that would be the main job of a private investigator there. And I only say that because that doesn't necessarily sound like a fun way to make a living. And you can disagree with this all you want. And it certainly doesn't fit in with kind of the image of the private investigator of somebody who's a little bit more impartial, who's trying to get to the bottom of the truth and then let the chips fall where they may.
Okay, but what happens on a case like this? You sit at the table with the defense team, and you see, let's say, 8 statements that people gave the police, okay? And you realize right away that the 8 statements, by and large, are all different kinds of scenarios going on here. And then what you do, and you're also talking to Jason, you're also talking to whoever, and you're saying, all right, what happened that night? Well, that's not true. What he's saying here is true, but this doesn't really happen. So what you try to do is you're trying to delve into it. Like I said, and again, just to get back to the liquor thing, you delve into that to show, hey, that's not true what they're saying. Okay, that's not true. See, and that's what you're doing with this. You're trying to see who's bringing truth to the table and who is not. You had some of these people that really went out on a limb to say whatever they wanted to say to make it really look good and juicy, to make sure that they're happy with me and nothing's going to happen with me. I'm not going to be charged with anything. Whereas some of the other ones told it like it was. Okay, yeah, Jason picked up the gun, man. He flipped it closed. The gun went off, blah, blah, blah. And they told the truth. So that's what you have to delve into. You have all those things in front of you, and you have to say, this is not true. and this is a lie. This is real, and that's what we tried to do in this case.
All right. So what does this guy Pelicano, and taking the story from the beginning, because he's a pretty famous guy, what does he do that goes against what private investigators are supposed to do?
Well, he does everything illegal. I mean, let's look first of all why he was just in jail. He had hand grenades and all kinds of stuff in his office. He threatens people. He does things illegally, illegal wiretaps. He does, that's a totally different thing. Again, when we had our convention, first World PI Convention in Vegas a couple years ago, 99 point something of the people I know in this business run their business the right way. Okay? This is a man that does not. This is a man that says, give me $50,000. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll make this go away. I'll threaten this one.
Like what? I mean, run through some of the things that what you could do, and then at what point does it cross the line for a private investigator?
Well, first of all, first thing I tell my people, I have a staff of 6 people, all coming from very good backgrounds, be it police or FBI or whatever, or criminal justice people, things of that nature. First thing I tell them is you don't go on any private property. You don't do anything illegal. Once they stopped about 2 years ago, cell phone records, okay? They used to be able legally at that time on divorce cases to obtain cell phone records, let's say on a cheating husband. You find out it was the girlfriend the whole bit. It was totally legal. What happened, though, was some agencies went online and allowed the general public to be able to do that, okay, also. So what happened is that the government stepped in and says, okay, instead of stepping in to say only certain people, police, private detectives licensed by the state can do this, they stopped everybody from doing it, okay? So what I mean is, so once that happened, I told my whole staff, no more cell phone information. That's it. It ended today. So you do everything now. As somebody else that's still a PI that wants to do their things illegally will still continue doing something of that nature. But, he threatened. He went after people. He did whatever. He harassed people. He did one thing that was just in the paper today. He did a vicious harassment campaign that drove a person right out of the state of California. I mean, all these kind of things that you just cannot do in the business. And, he worked in the Hollywood area. People paid him $100,000 here, $50,000. I said on one of the shows, Ian, that if I did 1/3 of what people have asked me to do as a PI, I'd be the multi-millionaire.
Like what?
Got to say no.
Like what?
Okay, I'll give you an example. A lady calls me one day. Her husband works in New York City. He's a prominent person. She says to me, Vito, I got the key. The husband was away on vacation. I have the key to my husband's file cabinet. Would you come with me to his office and we can go through the files and we can find out whatever he's doing? Definitely not. No way. Now, if somebody else that's ruthless would say, fine, give me a lot of money and I'll go with you. We'll go and do that. Okay, that's one example. Another thing.
Is that illegal?
Of course it is. But it's
her.
That's the man's private thing. I'll give you another one. Sometimes.
So even his wife can't do it?
Well, no, she's not supposed to do it either. They do it, but I don't want to hear about it. Somebody will call me and say, Vito, I want you to put a GPS system on my husband's car. Okay? My first question to them is, whose name is the car under? Well, it's my husband's name. Sorry, we can't do it. Okay? Now, and even if she says that it's in her name, we want to see the registration. Okay, see, that's everything.
They got to prove that they have the authority to be able to do that.
We do a lot of stuff computer-wise where somebody will say, I want my computer swept. I want to see what's on there. I want to see who my husband's talking to. The first thing we ask, all right, who uses the computer in the house? It's a family computer. It's in the family room. Even the teenagers use it. I use it. That allows us to do it. If she says, no, that's in my husband's home office, that's his computer, goodbye. So there's dozens and dozens of these type of rules that somebody like a Pelicano wouldn't even ask the same questions I just said to the people. He would just say, fine, give me $10,000, I'll be right over.
How much have you...
There's dozens of things of that nature.
What's the most you've ever been offered to do something illegal?
Well, I don't think I've even ever got really to that part, Ian. It's kind of been like, Vito, I would like for you to sneak in the back of the house and do this and do, I mean, we never even get past that stage, to be honest with you.
They don't start with, for $50,000, here's what I'd like you to do, kind of a thing.
No, it's never started that way. And I've had my license. I have no complaints against me in 20 years, and that's how I run my business. And that's how, and I make sure my people do the same thing. Because if I found out they did anything just to try to impress me or win the case, they're gone. So there's hundreds of references like I gave you what an illegal person can do in this business.
Now, you mentioned some divorce cases, and I think this is where we think is, at least I think, this sounds like the bread and butter of your average private investigator is getting involved in divorce cases. No? Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yes. If I had my choice, and I talk about it in the book, I'd much rather be working criminal cases just because it's something I like to sink my teeth into, or other cases. But the divorce cases, especially in what we have here called the Gold Coast of Connecticut, Fairfield County, that encompasses Greenwich and very rich communities, is 1/3 of my business. So you just can't say no to it. It's such a big aspect of the business. I hate divorces. I've seen it in my own family. It's not something enjoyable, but it is a service that you have to provide to, obtain evidence for whoever you're working for. But it's out of control. The divorce thing in the country is totally out of control now.
I get that. All right. So now you're hired to investigate a husband and or a wife. How often are those cases, even before it gets to a divorce, where you're hired to do, let's say, the kind of the Chinatown thing, where you got to go and take photos of a couple having sex or try to determine whether or not one of the spouses is cheating? How often does that come up?
Oh, it happens most of the time. Sometimes it's just on a suspicion. Sometimes they've gotten to the point where they've hired attorneys. And people a lot of times say, Ian, what do you got to do? What do you got to hire a private detective for? It's no fault this, no fault that. And I try to explain to people, and lawyers explain to them, that it's used for leverage. Okay? You see Joe Smith having an affair with somebody, walking hand to hand, having a romantic dinner, going into a motel. You get it all on film. What happens as the divorce process goes on, they're arguing about money, who's going to get the house in Vermont, all this kind of stuff. At one point, the wife's attorney calls the husband's attorney and says, Joe, listen, we're going to bring Mary Brown into court. We're going to bring her in for a deposition. Who the hell's Mary Brown? Well, ask your client, okay? They go ask the client. He says, oh, my God, that's the girl I've been seeing. They're going to bring her in. Oh, they can't bring her in. Well, they're going to bring her in. Meanwhile, Mary Brown is saying, I don't want to get involved in this. So what I tell people is 4 out of 5 times that I'm supposed to go to court to testify, or my staff, we never have to go. Because miraculously, the attorney calls the other one and says, he doesn't really want that house in Vermont. He hates the cold weather anyway. She can keep it. And so again, it's used for leverage. And the top attorneys know that, and that's why they hire PIs.
All right. So how often do you actually find yourself in a case where either you or your associates will be sitting in a car or sitting on a roof with a big long lens, taking photographs of a couple caught, what do they call that, delicti in flagrante or whatever that's called.
Right. The business has changed so much over the years, Ian. Back 15, 20 years ago, you used to do just that. You'd be in a minivan with darkened windows with this gigantic camcorder on your shoulder, waiting for somebody to come out of someplace, okay? We don't have to do that anymore. With the technology, with the pinhole cameras that are on your fanny pack or on your baseball cap, we can go right into a restaurant, stand at a bar, and face the individuals holding hands and kissing and have them right on film. So It's a totally different way from hiding in the back seat of a car with darkened windows. You don't have to do that anymore.
What can you do electronically, either as a private investigator or just as a citizen, using software, Trojan horse programs, or anything else that you can use to track what an individual is doing online?
Right. Well, interesting question. You have to know the laws of your state. Okay, same thing with taping somebody's phone call. Connecticut is a two-party state. Maybe you step over the line into New York, that may be a one-party state. But those laws change all the time.
And that means you have to have both parties' permission to tape as opposed to one
That's
party.
right. And you still have to, and one of my guys, he always follows up on that because that law can change at any time. One thing you think you're doing legally, and 6 months later it's illegal. Again, like I mentioned to you before, on the personal computers, you have to know what you're doing. You just can't go on an individual's computer and rig it and get everything on it if that's that person's computer. See? Again, the Pelicanos of the world would just say, hey, man, no problem, man. We'll do whatever you want. Give me the money, and I don't care whose car it is. I don't care whose computer it is. You got it. So you have to know your laws, and you have to know what you can or can't do. I'll give you a perfect example. We had a call a couple days ago. A lady called, and she wanted what's called a debugging, a sweep of her house, because she said her boyfriend is monitoring her. Okay? Now, we do them all the time. The trouble is, once we talked to her a little bit more in depth, we found out that this was the boyfriend's house. It was totally under his name, and this was just a recent girlfriend that had a suspicion. So once we heard that, we said, hey, Mary, we can't do that. That's his house. It's under his name. You're not even married to him. So see, again, the bad guys wouldn't even have gotten that far. The bad guys would have went over there, got the money, and did whatever. So there's so many different laws and so many questions and release forms that people have to sign before you jump into any of these things.
All right, I totally get that, I'm glad that you're crossing your T's and you're dotting your I's on that. I want to take a quick look at one other aspect of your life as a private investigator in these celebrity cases in just a moment. But we're also going to give the phone numbers out here so people can join in the conversation. I think the chapter I enjoyed a lot spoke to a lot of my questions on wanting to be a private investigator, and we'll talk about that coming up next hour. Plus, if you have a case, if there's something that's going on with you and you want to run it by Vito Colucci as to just how he would go about investigating it, what he might be able to offer you from his perspective, or any of the other cases that you think will have crossed his desk, we'll get to coming up when we start taking your phone calls next hour. We'll give the phone numbers coming up in just a minute. Inside the Private Eyes of a PI, Vito Colucci on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Inside the Private Eyes of a PI, that's where we've been all night. In fact, the whole theme for this conversation that we've had since starting the show has been about investigations. We talked with Galen Cook earlier. He's been investigating the D.B. Cooper case. And here Vito Colucci, who's been a private investigator since having left the police force in Stamford, Connecticut many years ago, has been involved in several high-profile cases and also some mundane ones that were very interesting. We haven't gotten to all of them yet. We will during the course of this hour. We'll get into your questions, too. Ever thought about being a private eye yourself? Could use the advice of a good private investigator? Here's your chance on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Vito Colucci, one of America's top private detectives, taking your calls. Get to there in just a second. Vito, you'd say that the most interesting case you ever had was what?
The most interesting one, I would probably say a big local Connecticut case about in the last 2 years with a priest who's going away to jail for quite a few years. He was robbing several $1 million from his parish. It was interesting because as I sat up late at night going through his Amex bills and seeing what he did, just the gall of what he did and everything of that nature, and it was very interesting. It was a high-profile case for Connecticut and New York, and just very interesting for having somebody with no accountability to anybody.
Why did it require, if his American Express bills, for example, are an indication of how much money this guy was going through, what was the role of you as a private investigator? What could you do that the police couldn't do in investigating fraud like that? Well, we had a young priest from the same parish and the bookkeeper from the parish that were not getting the answers and the results by going to the diocese, and they felt they had no other course of action to take than to come to me. And I took the case, I went into it, I delved, I got it up to several $100,000s of dollars. Wow.
With their permission, I brought it over to the FBI. who continued it and did a great job, and he was arrested, and he'll be going to jail fairly soon to do a pretty good sentence.
Let's get Jeff in California on Coast to Coast AM for Vito Colucci, author of Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. Jeff?
Hi, Vito. Hi, Ian. I didn't give my city because I am concerned about possible retaliation. I have a Pelicano story. A friend of mine who was a PI herself and me were exposing corruption in a Southern California governmental agency, and we had an audio tape that came into question by the prosecution as to the authenticity and whether it had been tampered with. So my PI friend got a hold of Pelicano and asked him to take a look at the tape and verify that it had not been, altered or tampered with, and it was in fact original. And he, because she was a PI, said that he would do it as a courtesy and as a professional courtesy. Well, he later sent a letter to her attorney stating something along the lines of if a high dollar amount fee wasn't paid, that the findings as discussed might not be able to be done. So we saw that as an extortion, thinly veiled. And the attorney who had done murder cases in the past got very nervous, left the case. Ultimately, he got in a lot of trouble, and when he was in this trouble that he's now in jail for, my PI friend out Pelicano by saying, look, if you don't send it back, I'm sure the people that are prosecuting you for what you're busted for now would be very interested in further information concerning your corruption. And she got it back with sealed with a Pelicano card on it and the whole deal. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that, Vito, as far as does that sound like something that would happen with this guy and the level of what should be done or not as far as a private investigator? Thank you.
Oh, well, I mean, it's incredible. It doesn't surprise me, okay, not at all, dealing with the individual here. You see, but then again, just like this priest case I was talking about, when you have no accountability and you run your business a certain way for many, many, many years and you don't get caught, and you keep getting worse and worse, and you keep just taking advantage of whatever you can take advantage of. So that doesn't surprise me that he would say, hey, by the way, send me a lot of money, or else I'm going to take the stuff that you gave me in confidence, and I'm going to go bring it to some other people. I mean, it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
It's Minnie in Kentucky with a question for Vito Colucci, Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. Minnie?
Yes, hello. I'm wondering about... they make these announcements that a lot of our computers been hacked into or something, and then these people are going to be open to having their identity stolen. And I rarely hear that they catch anyone. And I'm certain that these aren't accidents. I think these are like incremental releases from some of these banks. I just do. And a lot of the people who suffer, like the people who can stand at least, middle-class people or are veterans. And so, I'm wondering about that because, like I said, you never hear of them finding out who happens to steal,
You're talking about if people who come in and they are able to hack into the files, or when a bank accidentally releases.
Well, they say they accidentally lose stuff or somebody hacks into it, and you never hear of anybody being caught. I think this is extremely suspect.
Let's see what he says about that. Minnie, go ahead. Why catching somebody on the internet sounds pretty tough?
It is. The guy who works for me, Al, he's my internet authority. But what you also have to watch out for, Minnie, is nowadays, of course, everything that's going on, even, when you click on your computer and you see those Kenya and Nigeria things, just click on this. Or now what they're doing lately is these bank schemes. You get every bank in the country named in these emails to you that's saying your account has been closed. Please click on here. See, once you do all that stuff, once you click on, and many innocent people do that, you're opening yourself up to all your public information, all your personal information. Right. And what they do is they have so many different bank names that one of them is going to be yours. And you go, oh, my God, People's Bank, oh, my God, I better click on here and see what the problem is. They stopped my account.
But even in the news stories that pop up where it's not like somebody phishing for, internet people that they can dupe, but even in the stories where the bank says, oh, We accidentally released the information of about 15,000 of our clients. We're trying to recover it right now. We are notifying everybody that they may be exposed to fraud. And those are stories that often have to do with a background credit check information or something that came as a result of, a purchase of something about the bank. It's really hard to find out eventually who gets that information because the internet being fairly anonymous, that would take a team, wouldn't it? I mean, like a huge team to track that down?
Oh, without a doubt. And not only that, it's sold to people, and then that person can sell it to somebody else. So you have a long list of people that are paying money, a lot of money for this information.
Could that be not accidental, though? If people are paying for that information, back to Minnie's point, is it possible that it's not an accidental release of information, but the bank is selling this information out the back door?
Well, yeah, definitely. It could be that. All you need is a couple individuals in that bank that are corrupt, that know that, my God, you know what this information is worth here? Okay. It's worth millions of dollars. So, it's terrible, and it's a great question by her, but it's happening at all different. The department stores are doing that, too. Somebody goes in, works for a short time at a department store, gathers up a lot of information on customers, leaves there, sells it. I mean, and has nothing against that big store, whether it's a Macy's or whatever. That's not claiming they're doing anything wrong. It's just a bad individual or so.
Right. Nancy's in Arizona on the wild card line for Vito Colucci on Coast to Coast AM. Nancy?
Hi. I had a couple of run-ins. I was in I call it the little big case I can't discuss that I was involved in Hollywood. And the attorneys for the other side were some of the attorneys that used Pelicano, and I was chased all the way from L.A. to Arizona. I had cars following me down the street, and everywhere I went in a restaurant, I had my picture taken with friends. I was harassed. I had my phones tapped.
What had you done, or what did they want from you?
I was a plaintiff in a lawsuit.
Against a celebrity?
Against some biggies.
And
I can't really get into that.
That's okay. We're just trying to understand. So you had filed a lawsuit, and they chased you out into the desert, whatever, tried to get you out of California.
There anyway, but my career was pretty much destroyed. My attorney received the only attorney who was helping me, who wasn't intimidated by this, received the same email with the same threat on it as the L.A. reporter who started the Pelicano busting him for this whole thing. And the other thing that was interesting is that I have an acquaintance who is a private investigator for insurance companies in Chicago who knew Pelicano way back when and said, boy, he was lazy. He didn't know anything about my case. And he said, boy, he was lazy. I just asked him about him. Did you ever know him? He said, yeah. I knew him in Chicago. He was lazy. And I said, what do you mean he was lazy? He said, he was lazy. He used wiretaps on everybody.
Right. And that was a way he was able to get information without having to do any of the legwork.
Right.
Right. Well, Vito, where are you with this? This is very interesting.
Well, what they tried to do to Nancy is they tried to wear her down. Okay, they wanted her to get to the point where she throws up her hands and her family says to her, or she says to her family, wow, I'm not even going to get involved in this. I'm not even going to testify. I'm going to just try to get as far as what. And it's a tactic. It's a terrible tactic. We don't do it, and most good PIs don't do that. But, they pop up every place she goes. A supermarket, driving down the road, and they make themselves known that we're going to be here forever unless you do not testify. And that's what they did. And a lot of times they wear down people that way, Ian.
Yep. I actually had that approach given to me by a police chief once. There had been I had my car, I guess we'd say I got shaken down by a police officer on the side of the road who suspected that I was either dealing or taking drugs because I had long hair and I was driving late at night. It's actually coming back from a radio station, and I don't do drugs, never have done drugs. And they kept, a bunch of police officers came up and they called for backup, and they kept asking for permission to search my car. And I kept saying, go ahead. I mean, I didn't have anything to hide. And And they did, and the more they searched and the less they found, the angrier they got, until they were really getting intimidating. And it was clearly a case of they were embarrassed by having made this assumption. They knew that at this point they were violating my civil rights.
Right.
So I think they were trying to sort of scare me a little bit into feeling like I was just going to run for and never mention it again. But I went to the police chief the next day. I told him the whole story. And that police chief of that particular town it took down the information, got back to me, said, yes, the officers confirmed most of what you said, and you could pursue a grievance against them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good and honorable that he did that. And like I tell people all the time.
Wait.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then he followed it up with, but if you do, you'll never be able to drive through this town again.
Wow.
If you do, just want to let you know, police officers are human. They will circle the wagons, and I just want you to be prepared for the fact that you'll drive through, and you better never have a taillight out. You better never park your car slightly over the sidewalk line. You better not ever, make a turn signal too soon to the intersection. I mean, he laid it out, and I took my cue from him, and I said, okay, no grievance.
Yeah, well, there again, I mean, you were bullied, to be very honest with you. I mean, because he basically said they're going to profile you.
Right.
They're going to profile you, okay? I mean, two other cars may go by with a light out, but here comes Ian. Oh yeah, that's the guy that did this and that.
Let's keep his license plate on the dashboard and look for him. Let's get Vince. He's in North Dakota, first time caller line for Vito Colucci on Coast to Coast AM. Vince.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the D.B. Cooper case one time about statute of limitations. Is there a limitations on that?
Well, I mean, on the skyjacking?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think, was he ever, I don't know if he was ever, I can't ask Vito this, but I don't think he was ever convicted in absentia because they didn't have the name of anybody. So I would imagine, I don't know.
I don't think there'd be a statute of limitation on that, Ian. I could be wrong, but exactly for the reasons you just said.
Yeah. I don't know. Interesting. All right, let's go to Jim, Bedford, New York, on Coast to Coast AM for Vito Colucci. Jim?
Good morning, Vito. Vito, you and I met a few years back on a scapegoat case. I was part of the team of individuals who were hired by the family members for personal security and driving purposes.
Which family members? Scapegoat family members?
Well, it was Ann, the aunt, and the sister's brother, Stephen, and so on. I'm retired from the SP major crime. You and I, matter of fact, we had a couple of discussions in the back steps in the court of Norwalk.
Sure.
But I just like to concur with what you said, your assessment of that case, because I was dumbfounded right up to the verdict. I thought he was going to be acquitted. Now, I had many conversations myself with Michael, and I can't look into any man's heart, but I will tell you this much. Michael believed he didn't do that, and I, in no way, sitting from the voir dire, the jury selection up to the closing arguments, thought that they made their case. And I think you would probably agree with me to this extent that everybody thinks that celebrities get away with crimes by virtue of their celebrity. In the case of the Skakel case, had he been Michael Jones, there's no question in my mind he would have been acquitted. The notoriety and the celebrity attendant to that buried that guy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. I think they had to put this to rest, and he was the guy that happened to be sitting in that chair. So, he went down. But I do remember you, Jim. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, well, and for that, for the judge to allow that admissibility, admit that testimony from that a former resident of that school who was drug addicted, who gave testimony from the grave, that's beyond the pale. Absolutely beyond the pale.
Yeah.
That's right. And I appreciate that thought, but I mean, I'm sure that got tested in a appellate court, and I'm sure that they did everything they could to try to determine whether or not they could overturn the verdict. So in a way, I mean, again, the system does what the system does on that. I'm sort of in two minds on the Skakel case. I read your chapter on that, and I so see where you are with that. But at the same time, I can't help but come back to the fact that I don't think he was convicted because he was a Kennedy. I don't think his celebrity status got him, jurors that were coming after him per se. I don't know. You were closer to it, and you're kind of convinced that this was the case, that if he had been just the average person, he would have been acquitted from that?
I believe so. I definitely do on this case, without a doubt. And what Jim said, if it was Joe Schmo, it probably would have gone a different way. This is not like the Hollywood ones that they always seem to get acquitted, the Beretta guy and the whole bit. This was a Connecticut case, and it just didn't work right. I mean, don't forget, with the guy that died of the drug overdose, we were not allowed, obviously, to cross-examine him at a trial. The defense attorney was not allowed to, because he wasn't there. He died of a heroin overdose. So, I mean, you have many things like that going on, whereas people like Jim and other people say, I can't believe this. He was found guilty.
Inside the Private Eyes of a PI investigated some of America's best-known cases, and he's got some other reflections, too, we'll get to coming up. Your questions and comments for private investigator Vito Colucci. If you need help on something, how would you get a PI's perspective to help you? That'll be an interesting turn, I'm sure, coming up. Some people out there feel like they could use a private investigator. They just can't afford one. And then there's another case in the book I want to get to before we run out of time. Next hour, we'll give you the numbers so you can join the conversation, too. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Bonnet. Well, here we go. Vito Colucci in our last half hour. He's a private investigator, written the book Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. If you want a copy of this book, easy to link up to him through our coasttocoastam.com website. When you do, you'll be able to find out how you can order one of these books online. They're not available in bookstores. It's just out, but you can find it at Amazon or any of the other online book retailers, I'm sure. Inside the Private Eyes of a PI, Vito Colucci. I want to ask him about his gun. How often does he pull his gun as a private investigator? PIs on TV, like every day, they're whipping out their pistol for one reason or another. And also, I want to ask him, since he went back and he mentioned the case of Michael Skakel and how one of the people who had testified against him later died of a drug overdose. I want to touch on his chapter on dealing with mental illness next. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Let's get to a couple callers who've been hanging on the longest. Warner is in Minnesota on Coast to Coast AM for Vito Colucci. Go ahead, Warner.
Yes, sir, Ian. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I've tried to get a hold of you in Minnesota, but I've never been successful.
I'm sorry.
But Vito, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm involved in a PI case, to wit, and especially I've got one under investigation in a Midwestern state by that state's Attorney General's office. And the reason is he's a criminal. He's a wannabe extortionist, but he just utilized coercion against his client for the sake of cash in his pocket. Now, I turned in a 25-page report to the Attorney General's office and to the DA's office in the city in which that PI operates. The DA's office says, well, we wait for the Attorney General's report. Well, the Attorney General's rules about PIs, and they're bonded by the Attorney General's office. I'd like also you to tell me how much you are bonded for in the state in which you're licensed. But what are my chances of these people working on my behalf when when the PI is bonded by the state? And we know that DAs just don't jump on citizen-reported crime unless there's something in it for them sometimes or frequently in America.
All right, well, let's hear. Warren, I think you brought up really good questions. I don't want to lose any of them. Go ahead, Vito.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you do is each state has a different licensing policy, okay? We're licensed here in Connecticut by the state police. Anybody can make complaints to them. I think what you have to do, Warner, to be quite honest with you, is to continue to make a lot of noise on this. You can't let it sit. Now, you're saying the DA But is that is that the licensing agency there? So you have to go to whoever the licensing agency and make a formal complaint that way. What they would then do is then contact this PI, look into it. You need to present the evidence on your part and do things of that nature, because otherwise, you just can't let it go. You have to just keep following up, especially if you feel you're right on this.
Well, I know I'm right, and the investigative agency is the Attorney General's office of the state. They're the licensing agency for the PA, but their rules for investigation do not even mention criminal law. In other words, I'm wondering if, let's say this PI is guilty of an extortion of his client.
Right.
And he's investigated by the Attorney General's office. Their rules don't say that they even have to report that. It's just like what you and Ian were discussing here. We got a crime going on here, but the people that are bonding this PI are not obligated by their own rules to prosecute it.
Yeah. Would it be easier, and thank you, Warner, for this. I hope this is helpful. Would it help Vito if he hired a PI to investigate the PI?
Well, not necessarily just to investigate him, but to pay the guy a little money for his time in that state to find out what he should do. Okay, what should I do? I'm having a problem here. I'm getting stonewalled over here. Rather than to hire him on an hourly basis, somebody good that's reputable, that's got a great reputation, that's honest, and you do it that way, and you see if that person can help you, because nobody wants a bad PI, in their state. Believe me,
it ruins it for everybody. Elena in Roswell, New Mexico, on Coast to Coast AM for Vito Colucci. Elena?
Hi. Mr. Colucci, how would one legally be able to, shall we say, stand against an authority figure in a county, both local and federal, and the only things they holler are Patriot Act, and then everybody else folds?
Well, to stand against somebody, it depends what you've uncovered on that individual. When I was a cop, I worked undercover organized crime. I went against my own lieutenant, my own sergeant that ran the narcotics squad. It wasn't a favorable thing to do. People didn't like it, but I continued to do it until we got results. And that's what you have to do on your part. You have to make sure, first of all, you got to make sure you have documented evidence, and this is not just, something that's not documented, because nobody's going to help you on that part. You have to make sure you really have concrete evidence and just try to go to whoever, an agency or an official that you feel is going to be honest and fair, that's going to look into it for you.
Yeah. And of course, going to the media never hurts, too.
No, that's big help. Big help.
Yeah, but so let's say that they treat her like she's crazy, like,
right.
Okay, lady, whatever. You've run into situations like this where mental illness is a factor in the credibility of both the person you're looking for and also the person that may be hiring you, or the person that may be talking to you during the course of an investigation. Talk about that a little bit.
Oh, it's so amazing. I have a chapter in the book that deals just with that, Ian, and I start off that chapter by talking about somebody in my immediate family that I grew up with that had postpartum, and I was able to unfortunately learn so much about that area in my growing up years and into my adulthood. So when I see people come in my office now, it's amazing. It's amazing how many people out there. They could be vice presidents of companies. I may have to go through 3 secretaries to get them. They sound totally normal. Next thing you know, they're in my office and they're talking about people are on their roofs with parabolic mics, and they're able to hear what they're eating and listen to the enzymes in their stomach and go on and on. It's amazing how many people out there suffer with this. And I devoted a whole chapter in my book about it, and how I try to just, help them. I don't take their money. I try to, even on some cases, contact their loved ones to tell them that, hey, your mom was just in here. She wanted to hire me. She wanted to pay me unlimited amount of money. Obviously, I didn't take the case, but I'm worried about her going and opening up the phone book and continuing to call other PIs until she gets the one that's going to drain her bank account.
Right.
So it's amazing, Ian. There's just so many people out there that you wouldn't know if you passed them on the street.
And they need help. I mean, they need help. I say that
they don't need a PI. They need help.
They don't need a PI, but they think they need a private investigator. They think they need a wingman to help cover them as they're trying to uncover these things. I'm not passing any judgment on Elena's comments. I'm sure she's totally legit.
No.
But I mean, there are these folks out there, and you talk about them who you're a dream for them. You come with credibility, you come with experience, and they're looking for somebody like you to validate what they're going through. And in the end, of course, you can't.
Right.
But they don't know that you can't.
Right. See, what happens is they know they can't go to the police. They're afraid of the police, okay? And a lot of times my question to them is, hey, are you married? You guys, oh, yeah, my husband and my kid. Oh, but they don't believe me. They don't listen to me. So next best thing for them is, wait a minute, this guy's an ex-cop. He's a private detective, so he's big. He can make all these people go away. You see, and that's what they want. They want these people to go away. And I have found a lot of times after I talk to somebody like that, and they don't call back. Once I say to them, well, I'm really busy, I can't take your case right now, and the whole. But I try to let them off that way, because it's incredible. Once I got into this business, even with my situation with a loved one, I didn't realize just how many people out there are hurting that way.
Victoria's in Chicago. Question for Vito Colucci on Coast to Coast AM. Victoria?
Yes, hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hi. I just wondered, if there was a way to find out if someone was married.
Okay, because you're dating somebody and you want to determine whether or not they're involved in another relationship.
Yeah, if they're, adulterers or,
How can she find that out without hiring a PI?
You really can't unless you take it on yourself to go follow him. We get those cases all the time, and we have to go out and we're able to determine, okay, he's living with another woman, or his divorce did not go through, or he's two-timing you, or whatever it may be. It's very tough. That's something that basically you can't gather all that information from computer searches or things like that. A lot of times you have to get out there and actually watch the individual, see where they're going after work, and seeing if they're meeting anybody else. And obviously she can't do that because, the guy knows her. She's not trained in how to follow somebody.
Sure.
It's not the kind of thing where you get your cousin to do. If you have to spend a little money, you have to go and try to do it the proper way.
How much would that cost? I mean, just bottom.
It's something like that. If I get something like that, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. I'm trying to find out, okay, what's the days he's not seeing you? What days are you suspicious? Well, every Wednesday night he doesn't come over. He says he's doing this. So I would want to do a Wednesday night. I may want to do a weekend, something like that. But you want to limit it. A lot of times on something like that, you want to try to do it because you don't want to waste time on that. You're doing other major cases. You want to go out and maybe knock it out on that first day. To be able to give her an answer.
Can I ask you a question? You don't have to answer this, but I'm just curious. What's the most you've ever made on one case? Or your firm has?
Well, I'd rather not give the full answer, but the cases that are the most expensive are the criminal cases, of course.
Okay, but north of how much?
Oh, north of, $10,000, $20,000 and up.
Okay.
Depending on how big the case is. And again, that would only constitute really a major criminal cases.
Sure. Let's get to Mary. She's got an important question on the wild card line for Vito Colucci on Coast to Coast AM. Mary?
Hi.
Got a private investigator here. What do you need?
I've got 3 nieces that are living with their mother, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure, but I've seen evidence of abuse. And I was wondering if there's any way I could catch her, like some sort of camera that I could buy that I could put in a teddy bear or something.
That's very difficult to put it in the teddy bear because, the teddy bear is only good for that one area. Again, you're putting into somebody's house that's not yours. What I would suggest, truthfully, is to confide, if you could, with any other family members that you trust completely that maybe know, because you'd be surprised sometimes there's other people out there, a cousin or somebody else that may be feeling the same thing, and to get together with them and try to see a course of action that you take, and then, notify an agency. Once you notify the agencies in your state that you feel there's some child abuse going on, most of the ones I know and have seen across the country are pretty good. They'll jump on it right away. So, that would be my suggestion.
But, let's go back a little bit. Okay, let's say it's not a teddy bear. is there anything she could do electronically to surveil, say, if it's a small house and she suspects that the abuse is happening in the living room or something like that, can she plant a camera, go back and recover it later as a private citizen, as opposed to your hands being tied as an investigator?
I mean, she can do it. People do it all the time. It's not legal, and I don't know, depending on the laws of the state, I mean, they could hold her, liable for that, and they probably would not pursue any action because it would not be admissible in court. Obviously, sometimes you say, well, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway because I know
Right.
what's going on with my nieces, so the heck with it. I'm going to prove to people. And that does happen, but it's not the right way to go. I would much rather go through the agencies.
All right. William is in Florida on Coast to Coast AM for Vito Colucci. William?
Hey, Ian, it's a pleasure, both of you guys.
Thank you.
I got a question earlier tonight. You were talking about what would he do if he found out that somebody was guilty of a crime, but then he had to bow out gracefully and all this stuff. And I was just wondering, what about mailing it in anonymously? Is that only in the movies? I mean...
Yeah, I think it's a great point, William. Yeah, I mean, Vito, when we were talking about if you knew that the person that had hired you was guilty, and you didn't, you handed over the evidence to the district attorney, to the attorney representing the client, and not to the DA, could you ever just send through the back door or make a back channel sort of ex parte discovery to the district attorney about what you found?
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, it's an interesting point that William brought up. It's an interesting way to go. I have never done that on my part. Again, you want to be able, because you are licensed by the state and you work under the confidentiality that, you're bound to your client. You don't have a right to go out there and do other things. But it's a very interesting point. Depending on the nature and the seriousness of what you have uncovered, I can definitely see people doing that.
Yeah. All right. Now, how often do you have to, do you pack a gun every day?
I do carry a gun every day. The interesting, you made a comment before about the pulling out the gun and everything.
Yeah.
Well,
and
let me just say this.
Every PI show, the guy's got the gun out. Before the first commercial break, he's got the gun out.
That's it. Well, I haven't had a car chase in years, and I don't have a blonde on each arm. And as far as pulling out the gun, I was in a shootout on the police department where I won the Combat Cross. Not something you're proud of, but it happened. I have not pulled out my gun, though, as a private detective, and I'm glad I haven't, but I do carry a gun at all times.
You've never pulled it out?
Not as a private detective, no.
Right. How about that? How many years then now?
21.
How about that? And not had to pull it out once.
No, I'm glad of that. I pulled it out enough times on the police department.
Fair enough. Chuck is in Chicago on Coast to Coast AM listening to the Big 89 WLS. Chuck, you're talking to Vito Colucci.
Hello, Mr. Coach. How are you?
Good.
I had two questions for you, Vito. One, what were some of the roadblocks with the investigation with the Elan school Michael was at? And the other is a real good one, is just how do you start out as a PI with no police background?
Well, going to about the Elan school, that was the school that Michael went to. After Martha Moxley died, it was for troubled kids from across the country, just to let your viewers know.
Right.
Maybe they had drug problems or whatever it was. The roadblocks was trying to locate some of these people over the years, number one, especially with some of the women. They had different names, things of that nature, and to see the credibility of the people, both the defense people, which my responsibility was to track them down, bring them in, interview them. So you did have roadblocks. To answer your second question quickly, the licensing laws in each state. In Connecticut, to become a private detective, you would have to have been 5 years on a police department. When I got my license, it was 5 years you had to work in plain clothes, meaning as a detective or something, or work for 5 years for a licensed agency, a PI agency, and then after that you can get your own license. But you have to check. Every state is different, and you have to check with the licensing authority. They'll tell you what you could do to get your license in that state.
And there's a whole chapter on, so you want to be a private investigator, huh? And that's inside the private eyes of a PI. You have a link up to that book through coasttocoastam.com. You can buy it online. Vito Colucci, thank you so much for spending the time with us. And I look forward to, if you ever do roll up your sleeves on the D.B. Cooper case, let me know what you come up with.
Oh, definitely. This has been my pleasure. I enjoyed this. Thank you, Ian.
Good, thank you. And very good questions, too. Wish we could have gotten to everybody, but I imagine if you go sussing around, you'll find it online at coasttocoastam.com and get your questions answered there. Inside the Private Eyes of a PI. And Galen Cook will return in a couple of weeks when we find out more about that D.B. Cooper investigation. Make the best of this weekend. Deus te amat, and I do.